Welcome to this week's update video. In the last 2 weeks we started with the onion harvest on the field and the terraces. We made a promise come true that we promised ourselves. Put up the tomato climbing aid, which we developed. And put up the cucumbers climbing aid, which we made last year. At the end there's gonna be a short update about the current situation in our greenhouse. In the update video of week 112 and 113, you have seen me putting the garlic and onion bulbs into the first bed on the terraces next to our house. And time flew by so fast, now it is time to already harvest them. As you can see here, I didn't take good care about the weeds growing in the bed. Outside of the bed I could control them with a grass trimmer, but inside there is a lot of them growing pretty fast. So first off I had to get rid of those that I have better view and access to the onions which I want to harvest in this bed. Another issue that we're facing here is the walnut tree on the left hand side of the screen. I think you just can see some leaves of it. This casts a permanent shadow as other trees which are standing by. This also caused the harvest to be not as successful as I hoped for, but still it was a very good harvest. So we will have to think about improving that position here a little bit in the coming fall. Something that we already could monitor is the beds, which are very close to those trees, had a significant less harvest than the parts of the beds which were further away. So most likely their fate is sealed. And something that we managed this year pretty well is anytime we harvest or make a full harvest on the bed, we already have a different culture that we want to plant in this as young plants ready. Here we're gonna put in our chilies, which we had last year on the field, which caused quite a problem with the peppers. We ended up with having some peppers which were unbelievably spicy, and that is something we want to avoid this year. And also on the field, the onion harvest starts and continues. The result here is a little bit better than with the onions next to the house, and I do think this is mainly caused to the more sun that they get compared to those which are shadowed by the trees. And also here we already have the next cultures, young plants ready, which will be bush beans that we put in as 15 to 20 centimeter big plants, who some of them already have flowers on them. But first off, we're preparing the bed, meaning getting rid of a lot of weeds and roots, which we don't want in the bed, loosening up the ground a little bit. And then we double team to put those plants into the ground, which is actually pretty fast. I mean, you could argue if it's worth the whole time, pre-planting the bush beans and then putting them into the ground. But to be honest, I do think it makes a huge difference. It just took around 25 minutes to get 70% of the bed done. And we shall be 5 weeks early. A promise that we finally kept to ourselves is if we ever have again big tasks moving earth and ground, we will use the proper equipment. One of our very lovely neighbors helped us out there, and with his digger, and in basically no time he digged up the trench for our new electricity system for the garage. The last pieces to the house, we cut the concrete with an angle grinder and a big diamond disc, as this is way more straight approach or will cause less damage to the surroundings as we would have done it with a digger, and turned out pretty well. There was just a little bit more that we had to chisel away and then basically dig out the earth underneath it. It was a quite straightforward process.
Na, aufs Loch. Ich bin ein Elefant!
And with the help of this little elephant, we were able to put in the pipes in one afternoon. Although these are water pipes, we will use them for electricity as we want to run quite a lot of cables through them, and already did, and it turned out to be a very good idea to use such a big diameter. We are running 2 times a 5-pole cable and 2 times a 3-pole cable, both of them with 2.5 square millimeters diameter. The only job on this side of the cable which has to be done right now is making all the cable carriers on the wall and the ceiling up to the fuse box on the other side of the basement. The process for this is quite straightforward. You drill a hole, you put in a dowel, you put in one of those clips and put the countersink of that clip on so that the cable stays on it. And you do that for every cable, all 50 centimeters again. And it turns out, at the heat that we currently have outside, it's a rather nice job for the afternoon to work inside and put holes into the wall and cables. Although I'm never gonna become an electrician, I'm pretty pleased with the result. In the last episode, you have seen us welding together our tomato tees or climbing aids for the tomatoes. And in this episode, it's finally time to put them up onto the field and install them. I'm trying to put those steel tees around 2 meters into the field from the edges, and then not just level out the tomatoes but also the picture a little bit. In the next moment I will use a piece of wood to drive in the tomato pole with a big sledgehammer. A problem that occurred was that the wood was splitting up and basically hugged the metal piece which we welded on the bottom so heavily that we couldn't get it out later on. So there is something that we most likely have to improve coming the next iterations of this system. As we didn't have a separate piece of wood, I just directly hammered on the steel, which of course bent that a little bit, but still made it possible without any problem to drive them into the ground. On each end of the row we used a T-shaped steel, which we hammered into the ground. And now whilst editing this video, I see that there's a ladder just behind us, which we didn't use, rather used a very complex approach to hammer in those above your head. Well, must have been the sun. And in the next step we put in the 5mm cables, which shouldn't move at all because they aren't dynamic. On the one hand, we just put it into the T. On the other hand, we used a rope spanner to put a little bit more tension on those ropes. With the second ropes, we had some issues, as when we want to fill them through the channels, which we had welded on the T's on top, we couldn't get them to the last 2 of them because whilst welding them, I burnt through them and so much weld accumulated in those holes that I couldn't get the cable through. This is a design flaw which we will change on the other 4 T's. And then it was finally time to use those tomato teas for what I have planned to use them, to hang some tomatoes. So I put up those hooks with ropes, which we bought, and put them around the tomatoes to help them as a climbing aid, and cut away all the small branches which aren't productive and aren't helping the tomato to grow. And that's basically how I spent my afternoon. It was pretty neat. Something else I'm realizing now whilst editing is that the first tee is very far away off the edge of the bed. As in this area we will not be able to use those strings and hooks, we will have to use conventional sticks, which aren't as functional as this system should be. So this is something we will improve on the next row that we pull up, and for sure next year when we put them up again. And here's a small improvement you can see directly. On the right hand side are the small cable carriers for the steel cable, which I welded up in some spaces. And now I'm using this bigger pipe stack, which I have laying around, where it shouldn't be any problem to get the next cables through. Something that I underestimated or didn't know before, welding something round to something flat is way more complex than just welding something flat to something flat. And even at that I still suck. So those welding beads looked really terrible, but they hold up. So fine for me. And there we go. That's another evening well spent by welding together some teas which we will put up this weekend. As the tomatoes for whom they are thought to be used are already growing to all sides and have to be straightened up. In the video update of week 88 and 89, as well as 90 and 91, we built the cucumbers ladders in the last year. This year we already have figured out how to use them and got a pretty neat workflow of putting them up, which helped out a lot as we don't have to build this infrastructure. This ladder consists out of one standing part, which you can see here hammered into the ground, one vertical part, which also has at its end a half overlapping joint to interact with the next one, and then those leather parts which have the holes, where you will put in the simple or the single steps to have it connected together. This makes it rather simple putting them up. You just need one person. But if you have four hands, it's always easier and you don't have to run that often. We also used the opportunity, as we were already working on this bed, to make a little bit of weed control. Went to the ground and got rid of all of them, and also of the weeds on the ways, which is never a bad thing to do. And here we go. That's the result. 2 of 3 ladders already standing, and one of the big tomato teas standing in the background as well. Something we talked about in the last update is the left row of tomatoes here. They don't grow properly and are very small, and some have been eaten by critters. So we killed them off, or a lot of them, and replaced actually 10 of them with other tomatoes that we still had in stock and way bigger. And this week the tomatoes that we planted already look way better. So I do think this was the right decision to go, and time shall tell how well they do. And with that, we are at the very end of our video. We had some nice guests helping of us. As of the point of the video, I don't know if all of them want to be named. I don't put their names here. But that's it. Have a nice one and see you soon.